What a comeback by the Indiana Pacers, down 24 after the first quarter, and they get the win over the Bulls to close out their pre-All-Star break season. How did they pull it off? What happened? Buddy Hield breaking a franchise record for Reggie Miller. And let's talk perspective from this Pacers season, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're diving into a heck of a game. What a way for the Pacers to close out their pre-All-Star game, All-Star weekend, whatever stretch of the season. A thrilling comeback win over the Chicago Bulls. Somehow every Pacers Bulls game turns into something insane. In all three this year so far, Pacers have found themselves down big early and have valiantly fought back and won two of them. It's been nuts. And it was again Wednesday night. We'll talk about how the Pacers pulled it off. What did they change? Who played well, which was basically everybody, and how they got it done. Can they repeat any of this? Buddy Hield says we've got to sustain this after the game. Speaking of Buddy Hield, franchise record passing Reggie Miller on the three-point list, talking about that and contextualizing that. And to end the show, perspective on the Pacers season. Why? Because they just won 26 games, which if you're keeping track at home, is one more than last season already. But we start with the win that got them to number 26. A hell of a comeback win over the Chicago Bulls. And I thought this one was donezo so early. I think most people did. 39-15 at the end of the first quarter. That was as big as the Bulls lead got, but that was still just, that was maybe, I mean, the Pacers have had so many bad starts this season. If you follow this team at all, if you've listened to the show at all, you've heard me talk about it. They come out flat. It's very perplexing, even internally, because the lineup that starts does well throughout the game in other spurts. The players that start do well at adjusting as the game continues. It's not personnel. It's not necessarily the lineups. They just aren't a good team at the start of games for some reason, whether that's preparedness, whether that's, they're better at adjusting than starting. I don't know. Maybe they're just better at fighting back mentality-wise, and they talk about that a lot, but they start games horribly. And this was among the worst, maybe the single worst. It was 6-6, and then it was 22-14, and then it was 30-50. It was just brutal. Pacers had an awful first quarter. They were getting smoked, and I don't know how they do this or what changed, but they had such an impassioned start to the second quarter that made you think they could turn this around. And here's how they did it. If I had to give you a theme of how the Pacers made this comeback, defense is the answer. And it's a very lazy, short answer because there's a lot that goes into that between effort and rebounding and matchups and things like that. But defense was the answer. This team defended maybe as well as they've defended this entire 20-game, 19-game, whatever slump that they've been in, right? They were locking guys up. They were rotating well. They were on the glass. Whoever was in the game was defending well. Even the new guy, Jordan Nwora, was in there for a little bit. His offense was shaky. His defense was fine. Jalen Smith got a spurt in the fourth quarter. That was huge. Rick Carlisle lauding him after the game. Jalen Smith's minutes were the difference in this game. Isaiah Jackson in his first half stint was solid. They had Miles Turner back. He was good on the defensive end, right? They started TJ McConnell with the hopes that his defense on Zach LaVine from the last time the Pacers played the Bulls could repeat. It didn't, but his defense was still solid up throughout the game. You could go through guy by guy, but the Pacers defense stepped up. And if you look at the box score, Rick Carlisle has always talked about, he has this benchmark, the high benchmark, not to say this is a goal, but he always talks about 30 points a quarter allowed, right? If they can at most allow that, and that's still high, that'd be 120 in every quarter. That would not be good, but that's the high mark of what he considers an acceptable defensive quarter, right? They would like to be lower than that. Every team obviously would like it to be 0, but that's sort of what he feels like is like the standard of, okay, what, that was fine. They allowed 19 in the second quarter. The first 6 minutes of the second quarter, the Pacers allowed 4 points. They weren't even scoring that well. They only cut into the lead by 8 in the second quarter. It was 12-4 after 6 minutes of the second quarter. So the Pacers weren't even really capitalizing on it at first, but they showed that they knew how to defend, and that was key. They only give up 19 in the second quarter. In the third quarter, they give up 28. Not great, close to their upper mark, but they scored 40. We'll talk about the second half offensive pivot in a minute. And then in the fourth, they gave up 27. So over those final 3 frames, they only gave up 74 points. That's excellent, right? Over the course of a full game, that would average to less than 100. That will win you a lot of games in the NBA. And so even though they gave up 39 in the first and started out flat offensively, they were able to slowly but surely kind of catch back up. And the Bulls all season, including against the Pacers about 2 or 3 weeks ago, have been awful at holding leads. Their mental is not great when they're ahead. They slow down a bit. They didn't have DeRozan in this game to punish the Pacers in a lot of these situations. So the Pacers bullying defense, and I think a lot of it was being physical as well. Aaron Nesmith, fantastic game. He was maybe the most consistent Pacer start to finish. Fantastic physical in-your-face defense all game. Miles Turner was physical. He did well on the glass. He had his normal 3 blocks, right, guys? Benedict Mathurin, I thought, notably physical on the defensive end in this game, right? Guys were really good on that end of the floor. Jordan Nwora with 3 boards. Jalen Smith was physical in his stint. Like everybody, I mean, I don't have to go through every player on the roster. You get the idea. That was a big part of it too. Hitting hard, getting back in that way. That's something they've not been particularly good at this year. They showed that they know how when they need to be. That was a big part of this as well. So the defense is what I would say was the big thing that took the Pacers from floundering, miserable team to able to pull off one of their most impressive comebacks of the season. In fact, to put it into perspective, thanks to ESPN Stats and Info, I'll just read their tweet from ESPN Stats and Info official account. The Pacers beat the Bulls after trailing by 24 points at the end of the first quarter. That marks the 4th largest comeback win at the end of the first quarter in the shot clock era and the largest since 2008. Very impressive stuff from the Pacers to pull this off. But like I said, the defense obviously was good and most of it. But in the second half, they also figured out some stuff on the offensive end that they really needed. Mainly, how about Buddy Hield coming alive? He's been shooting a little rough these last couple of games, right? Had a complete brick and an air ball against Utah. That is so unlike him, right? Fantastic shooter, works on his craft to the highest degree, which we'll get into in the second segment. He, in the early part of the third quarter, I think this was the first 3 he made of the game. Maybe it was the second. He banked it in, right? He it was a little screwy release, and it banked in. He kind of was like, okay, it went in. And something about it, it's just how shooters are wired. It clicked for him at that point. And he was awesome for the rest of the game, especially in offense. 8 for 12 from the field, 6 for 10 from 3, 27 points. And all 27 of those points and all of those made shots were in the second half. The Bulls just completely lost track of how to defend him, of what he's good at, how to slow him down. He got to the line a few times, a very unusual and added skill for him. He was amazing in this fourth quarter, in the second half on the offensive end. And some other guys were huge throughout the whole game, but really Chris Duarte in the second quarter was awesome. He had 14 points in this game. He made 4 threes. You know, given his season, the Pacers will, of course, take that. He got back in the rotation instead of George Hill in this game, which I think it should be a permanent change. Benedict Mathurin had 14 points on 10 shots. He played a really nice game. Miles Turner had 17 points, including the game go-ahead 3 with 79 seconds to go, one of them. And Tyrese Halliburton was, of course, his usual excellent on offense with 16 points and 8 assists, and the official go-ahead shot on a layup with 30 seconds to go. So everybody contributed offensively who played a significant amount in this game. 7 assists for TJ McConnell, right? But besides the big men who only played less than 6 or 7 minutes each, and Nwora, who was 0 for 4. Excuse me, it's Nwora. It's hard with an N at the end of his first name. Nwora, was 0 for 4, but played fine defense. Everybody contributed offensively. Buddy Hield was the impetus behind it. His spacing was huge. His shooting was huge. And that, on top of the Pacers' defense, allowed them to play the way they played when they're at their best, in transition, playing free, getting open looks, playing fast, being really hard to contain, and they were hitting back in a way that was huge. And down the stretch, they still had to seal it, right? This was, I thought, another key part of this. They have not been playing well in the clutch recently. A lot of close losses, even since Halliburton returned, right? You could even go back to when he was injured, but 2 points to Atlanta, 1 point to the Lakers. There's a bunch more in there. Those are just the first 2 that came to my head. They haven't won a lot of these close games. They did it in this one. Part of it was the free throw game. They did not miss any of their key free throws. Miles Turner hit 2. Aaron Nesmith hit 2. Buddy Hield hit 2. Like, those were huge, of course, as well. But they actually executed on both ends, and they were down 2 with about 5 minutes to go after a Zach LaVine shot. Rick Carlisle calls timeout, gathers the troops. They actually get down 6 before 2 key threes, one by Hield. I think the other one was by Ben Mathurin in the left corner. Huge moments from every Pacer who played, and a huge win for the Pacers who really needed one before the All-Star break, right? A get-right win, a feel-good win, whatever wording you want to use. But, it just gives you that added little bit of momentum when you come back from your trip, and you feel better about how you're playing, how the team's playing as you head into this break. So Pacers needed this win, and they got it. And I think defense was the key, and Buddy Hield leading the charge on offense got them over the line for this comeback win. Huge win for the Pacers. Now 26-34, 60 games. I cannot believe we're that far into the season as we hit the All-Star break. In this game also, Buddy Hield hit 6 threes, which means he's now hit 230 this season. Unbelievable. That is a Pacers franchise record. How did he do it? What makes him such a good shooter? And let's contextualize this, because franchise records in 60 games, that's crazy. We'll break it down here in the second segment, including what we talked to with Hield himself after the game. Before we do that, though, I got to talk to you guys about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is officially here now for the Pacers. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. How fitting on Buddy Hield's record-breaking day. There's so much on there for you to dive into on FanDuel. Player props, spreads, money lines, exclusive bets like their 2x3, 2 3-pointer scored in the first 3 minutes. And FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Lakers. LeBron played. That team was healthy. Mo Bamba was back. The new look Lakers, what do they look like? A winning team. That's what they look like. And I actually am curious to dive into that full game at some point in the near future. Beating the Pels is impressive for that new look Lakers team. But we're talking Pacers here today, and specifically Buddy Hield. First and foremost, congratulations to Hield, who works so hard to be a great shooter. That dude, Miles Turner was talking about this. Like, they have this, like, I don't know if it's unspoken or spoken, but this little contest about who's the last in the gym, and Buddy Hield wins his fair share of times. And every time we're at practice, I've shared this, I think, on the show before, when we request players for media, like, he's the guy we wait the longest for, because he's getting his shots up all the time. This dude is always in the gym. It's so, and Rick Carlisle's phrasing after the game today was, he's obsessed with being an elite shooter. He's obsessed with shooting and being good at it. And, he learned how to put arc on his jumper from the basket he played on. Growing up in the Bahamas was literally a basket, like not an actual hoop, I don't think. And he was explaining that to us after the game, right? That he had to learn a different way to, like, have more arc on it and shoot. And he just became this awesome shooter. He studied Steph and Clay. And I'm using all the anecdotes way too early in the story here, but Buddy Hield's just one of the best shooters in league history, quite frankly. We're kind of in the early era of threes being embraced the way they are, but he's one of the guys who has embraced it. He is the Kings' top 3 individual seasons in three-pointers made. And now the Pacers' #1. That is the kind of legacy and career that Buddy Hield will leave behind as one of the pioneers of the earlier times of just aggressive amounts of three-point shooting. And he is fantastic at it. And I think that what makes it special, and something he kind of noted for this season, is it's not just that he's, like, getting them up, right? It's not just that he's shooting a bunch. And he even joked, like the guy who might break my record is Tyrese, right? But he even joked, he said he doesn't get up enough, right? Buddy Hield gets up the threes, but he also makes them, right? And that's, I think, what he's proud of. 42.3% this season. That's the third best of his career, but it's 0.08% behind his best season and 0.04% behind his second best season. It's basically up there with the best three-point shooting seasons of his entire career. And that adds to the magnitude kind of what he's doing, is that he's able to be efficient on the volume because he's so obsessed with being the absolute best shooter he can be. And he did the thing that every guy who's a good shooter does. And there's something to this. Your teammates have to get you the ball in the right spot, at the right time, when you're open, when you're moving. And Rick Carlisle even said, yeah, Tyrese Halliburton is a big part of him getting this record as well. But Buddy Hield deserves all the credit you can possibly give him for working so hard to be this level of shooter, to be able to make 233s, still the league leader. I mean, I know Steph missed a bunch of time, and by the end of the year, it's possible that, although Curry is hurt right now, it's likely, I would say, because of Steph's current injury, that Buddy Hield hit the end of the season as the league leader No one else entering the night was even at 200 threes. I'm not sure if Dame or Clay made it. So it's possible at the All-Star break, Buddy Hield's the only guy in the league at over 200 threes. He's at 230, right? He's been scorching the Nets this season. And part of what makes it so impressive to me, the way he works on his craft, is he's such a man of routine. And I think that there's so many things that he does that are important to what he feels like are necessary parts of being an awesome shooter. Like if you've been to a game and you haven't seen it, I would advise you to watch him. And if you can catch these things on the broadcast, right? This has been kind of shared on a few different social media pages, but like, he like wads up a piece of paper and shoots it into some Pacers staffer's little fake basket when he's like about to run on the court before the game starts. And he like runs and jumps up and grabs the rim before the tip. And then he runs over to the ref and he grabs the ball and he spins it in his hands. And, if we talked to him today, I said, like, what part of your routine is so important, or do you feel like you need to do all of it? And he's like, yeah, when my hands are cold, I need to touch the ball, right? I just have to touch it to feel warm and to feel it and things like that. And you can see him like take the ball from the ref sometimes in the middle of the game and just like spin it and then hand it right back, like at random moments. Most of them are out of bounds, but like even when the Pacers don't have the ball or like dead balls, he'll just get a free throw up, right? These things that look like minute kind of things to him are really important parts of the mental aspect of shooting, the physical aspect of form and things like that. And I think that's all just so fascinating. And to see him do it every day has been kind of unlike any other player skill I've ever seen, because it's such a unique approach to everything, right? I see a lot of great players for the Pacers do many great things. Sabonis was the best and is the best screen setter in the NBA. Turner's one of the best shot blockers in the league. Like he could set the Pacers franchise record for total blocks, right? All these things, and they don't have it. They have their own unique quirks, but nothing to the extent of Hield, where every single aspect, it feels like, of his approach is unique. And the fact that Carlisle called him obsessed with being a great shooter, I thought was extremely noteworthy. And passing Reggie Miller, right? One of the pioneers of shooting threes, is of course also a big part of what makes this special, in that, it's Reggie Miller, right? This not to belittle any other franchises or any other Pacers ability to shoot the ball, but like Reggie was known for his shooting, way ahead of his time. And Buddy Hield got him 60 games in to this season. It's just unbelievable the level that he's been able to kind of shoot at this year. And even in Reggie's heyday, he was kind of being told to shoot more by his teammates, but really never quite did it. But another part of this is, I believe, I'm trying to get this up in front of me, but I'm completely failing. Reggie's season of hitting his most threes, when he hit 229, was one of the few seasons when the NBA was experimenting. It was, yes, one of the few seasons the NBA was experimenting with a shortened three-point line in 1997, right? It was only 22 feet that season. Like that if you look at Michael Jordan, for example, his Basketball Reference page, just random little blip in the middle of his career where he was shooting much better from three because the three-point line was shorter. Reggie Miller's season, where he set the Pacers franchise record, was one of those years where it was shorter, right? In 1996, 97, I believe is when it was. He hit 43% that year, which is fantastic. He took 6 a game. That was far and away the most he took per game in his career was that season. But it was a shorter line, but still he hit 229 that year. And again, that was the league lead. He hit 167 in 1992-93. That led the NBA. Buddy Hield hit that probably before the calendar flipped to 2023, right? The game has obviously changed, right? Buddy Hield's record will probably be broken at some point anyway, just because of how threes evolve, although he is one of the premier shooters in the league. But it's fascinating that to break a guy like Reggie Miller's record for threes, like thinking about the context of that, that's crazy, right? Reggie Miller is known for his shooting and being one of the best shooters in NBA history through his time with the Pacers. And Buddy Hield in 60 games was able to break his record on longer threes too, on like actual long range threes. And the differences between the eras, Buddy Hield's taking 9 a game, and Reggie Miller in his peak season took 6.6 per game. But also, Buddy Hield is hitting the same percentage, 0.04 apart, basically the same percentage that Reggie Miller hit the season he set the previous Pacers franchise record. So credit to Buddy Hield, who, like Carlisle said, and like his action show, is obsessed with being a good shooter. He wants to be the best shooter he possibly can be. He's worked at this for years and years, and he deserves to be in the Pacers franchise record books for being the level of shooter he is. And how fitting that it comes on a night where he's huge because of his three-point shooting. He makes 6 threes in a fantastic game where his shooting transforms the game and shows how valuable it can be on an NBA floor in terms of actual points, obviously, but spacing and defensive attention and just a game-changing skill. He was fantastic, a well-deserved accomplishment for Buddy Hield, and how fitting that he's officially, now it's out by the NBA, in the three-point contest on Saturday, where he'll defend his 2020 NBA three-point shootout title. Looking forward to watching that. We'll have that all covered for you here on Locked On Pacers. Speaking of All-Star break and weekend, let's give some perspective on this Pacers season heading to this point. We're 60 games in to this Pacers season, and they are obviously slumping very, very hard. I think we're a little lost in the sauce when looking at where the Pacers are right now. I'll talk about why to close out today's show. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today, and of course, every single day for your second listen. How about Locked On Bulls? Hear what those guys are saying about the Bulls blowing another big lead, especially another one to the Pacers. Those teams are close in the standings. That was a big game for the Bulls. They didn't have DeRozan. That'd have been a huge win for them to steal. Instead, another loss for Chicago, who's having a miserable season as you can possibly have from a coverage and fandom perspective. It just feels like you're recycling the same storylines and cliches over and over. Look, let's talk about this Pacers season. This is a very broad strokes topic. All I typed in my notes is perspective. No notes, just vibes. That Pacers won their 26th game tonight. For those of you who are astute and keep track of these things, or for those of you who listened to me say this earlier in the show, that is more than they had last season. Pacers won 25 games last season, and if you'll recall, they started last season with Domantas Sabonis and Malcolm Brogdon and Karis LeVert and Miles Turner and Torrey Craig and Justin Holiday, and you get the idea, a team that was contending, right? The context entering last season was, this is a team that changed coaches from Nate Bjorkgren to Rick Carlisle, and that alone, plus improved health, is going to guide them to more wins. They're going to be better than the 34-38 team they were. That team was supposed to be good, and they weren't good. And this year's team wasn't supposed to be good, but is better than the team that is supposed to be good by a decent margin. And I think that is very impressive and says a lot about this current Pacers team, that they're better than a lot of people, including me, give them credit for. Because not only is 26 wins more than the Pacers had last season, and one of their worst seasons in franchise history, especially when compared to expectations going 25-57, it's also the exact win total I predicted for the Pacers this season. When Adam and I sat down and did our run through the schedule exercise, I had the Pacers at 26 wins and 56 losses. They have 26 wins right now. They only have 34 losses. I don't think they're going to lose their last 22 games of the season. And I'm happy to kind of eat crow, because this group deserves all the credit they can get for being good to start this season. And so why am I talking about perspective? It doesn't matter what I predicted. It doesn't matter that they're winning more than last year. I think the perspective is, given the context of their last however many games you would like to go back, you could say 20. That's one game over. They've won, I think, 4 of their last 20, because 20 games ago was the Hornets game they won before Haliburton got hurt. Either way, they've been playing miserably bad, right? They have not had a good 2023. Injuries have been involved. A lot of good things have happened in the middle that I think have kind of broken up how bad this stretch is. I was talking to Dustin Dopirak about this, right? Like, when a team loses, they lost 69-18 entering this Bulls game. Like, that sounds awful, right? That should be every story. And I hand up, have not been, talking enough about how poor the Pacers have been playing. But, in the midst of all that, Haliburton was hurt. So there was some context of like, yep, it makes sense why they're losing. And then he returned. And that was a big story. And that's a feel-good story because he played really good. And then he was named an all-star. And then Miles Turner got the extension. And then the trade deadline dominated the headlines. And all these things kept being bigger stories for one reason or another that kind of cut in the way of talking about the Pacers' struggles. And yet, I still feel like the Pacers' struggles have been almost too under the microscope, and not enough zoom-out perspective has been given to this team is still, with the stretch, better than anyone thought they would be this year, right? This is, Rick Carlisle said at practice earlier this week, right, when talking about kind of this team's picture right now, this is year one, or he later kind of changed it and said, I guess year two, but very early stages of a rebuild, right? And I always talk about this when I talk about the Pacers' direction. Their best player, their all-star, is 22. In 2 weeks from now, he'll be 23. But still, he's 22. Their promising 6th overall pick, who's going to finish second in Rookie of the Year voting and is so talented and draws some crazy player comps when you plug in his statistical profile, and has been on a tear. these last couple weeks outside of one kind of stinky game in Miami, right? They're fantastic players. Halliburton and Mathurin are. And Turner's been great this year, and they found some other gem young players. And they're way ahead of schedule despite this crappy stretch. And so even if they kind of, I don't think they'll be as bad as they were for their last 20 games in their final 22 games coming up. I also don't think they'll be as good as they were in the first half of the season in the stretch coming up. But they're probably going to be somewhere in between. Either way, that team is better than anyone thought. And that kind of sets the scene for their future, their post All-Star break future of what this team is, right? They are already kind of headed down a path where it's clear who the core pieces are for the next Pacers team that contends. It's clear what they need. But I think that people in this stretch, and if you think this way, it's fine to think however you want, but I just think I want to add some perspective to this team that they're already better than the preseason expectations. So even though they're having whatever you want to call it, growing pains, coming back to earth, they're still coming back to earth at a higher spot than they were supposed to be. They're ahead of schedule on a rebuild. And I think that's very noteworthy for a young team that clearly has shown that if you wanted to talk about what the best case scenario for the Pacers would be this season, it's that one or two guys show that they're, a star level talent, all-star level talent, whatever, good enough to be a leader of this team that is good enough to be on the next Pacers team that whatever, wins a series, wins whatever you want your baseline to be. And they've shown to have two of those guys and maybe even more than two of those guys on this team. And I think that as they lost a bunch, everybody was saying, and that they still could lose a bunch. I guess this is still an ongoing slump, but I saw a lot of, crashing back to earth. This team isn't good. Disappointment about this or that. Where I'm just, I think they're playing awful and deserve a lot of ridicule for the way they were playing. Don't get me wrong, but I also think that if you zoom out, things are still pretty good for where this team is and where they're headed. And hitting the All-Star break is a good time to kind of stop and reflect on. Oh yeah, they're the fact that they're already at 26 wins, which is better than most people predicted they would be, and it's year one or year two or whatever of a rebuild, a new era, whatever terminology has been used by me, the team, whoever you listen to and enjoy their content for. I think that that's an important perspective that's kind of gotten lost, is that this team is ahead of schedule, clearly has core pieces, clearly has their identity defined. And that's the kind of a hard part of the rebuild, is to get one, that level of talent, and two, get that identity drawn out, to figure out, because this is something when I've been doing these shows all season, previewing games, and I have someone who covers other teams talk about what their team did well in building. The one that I did with Ryan Blackburn talking about the Nuggets stood out to me, where they figured out Jokic was good and they formed an identity with him, and they built their team out with that identity in mind with a lot of their moves. And I think a lot of teams can learn from that, including the Pacers, who now have that identity, have the player who sets that identity, and have other players who are part of that team's and that identity's success already on the team. And now they can grow together. And these pains have been brutal. This team has not played well since whatever, the injury on January 11th or since January 8th or in their last 20 games, whatever benchmark you want to use. But the big picture for this team, given how strong they started the season and showed that they have a formula for success, right? Top 10 defense for a month of their best stretch of play from, just after Thanksgiving to Christmas, right? One of the best offenses in the league in the clutch, having a dude in Tyrese Halliburton on the team, right? It's been a very successful season, and their success to this point, despite the recency part, which is more fresh in your head, including mine, being really ugly, their season up to this point has been, to me, very successful, an overwhelming success. And I think that perspective is needed heading into the All-Star break. And if that just sounded like me rambling, I apologize, but I wanted to get that point across because I've been kind of surprised by the tone that fans have taken in the last couple of weeks. But you know what? Take the tone you want, follow the team the way you want. But I think that this perspective can be valuable when looking at this team in the break. Speaking of the break, we're here. I will be traveling, not to Utah. This is when I take vacation. So these next couple shows you'll hear will be pre-recorded, but I still think very important stuff. Tomorrow, we're talking about the moves the Pacers can still make the rest of the season, something I usually do right after the trade deadline in terms of signings, buyouts, contract conversions, stuff you could still see the Pacers do before their season ends or even right after their season ends in one case. Next Monday, we'll be talking all the All-Star Weekend festivities, 3-point, G League, Rising Stars, of course, All-Star with Halliburton. Next Tuesday, we'll be talking about draft stuff, not players necessarily, but what picks the Pacers have and how that should influence your rooting guide as a fan of this team down the stretch of the season. And then I'll be back next Wednesday diving into the last quarter of the season before their game next Thursday against the Celtics. Lots of fun stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show and the first 60 games of the season. Enjoy this time without some Pacers basketball. It's, of course, love the games, love the NBA, but this time is always a little bit of fun too, to kind of zoom out and step away for a bit. And we'll be back every day, including tomorrow. So thank you guys so much for listening. Have a fantastic day. We will see you tomorrow.